All right, comrades. So, APEURO, this is your update for March 19th. You'll want to have out your Stalin's Rise document while you watch this Edpuzzle video here. Just some reminders about things. Today's task is going to be to follow along with this video. There's going to be a couple questions on the Edpuzzle. Mostly they're reflection questions, so I can get some more questions. By the way, thank you everyone for jumping on the Edpuzzle thing. It seems like a lot of you got it, understood it, and I really appreciated the questions you wrote. I'm going to answer them on Haiku as well as in the emails because email seems to be working right now. Your other task for today besides this video is there's a 5-year plan reading to do with some reflection questions as well, and that'll be in the email and in or on Haiku as well. For tomorrow, there'll be another video, and the test corrections are due tomorrow. For over the break time, there's that reading, chapter 26, 27, and we'll have some discussion board kind of stuff, so simpler things. Today we're going to go over again Stalin's Rise and recap the early Soviet Union from the reading, and then you're going to have a chance to look at some fun pictures, and I'll introduce the 5-year plan. This is what the aim is here. Alright, so last time we talked about Russia was about 1917 and up to 1922 with the Russian Revolution and the Russian Civil War. Now, one of the questions brought up in the fascism thing made me think about we got to make sure we understand terminology again and reflect on what communism means. The first terminology we need to go over is we often have to call it Communist Russia or Soviet Russia. The country we're talking about right now is the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, USSR or the Soviet Union. And why do we call it that? Well, the Soviets were those communist workers' unions that led the revolution. And the Soviet Union is supposed to be made up of all of those making decisions in smaller republics that then fed into the larger federal level of government. So in the Soviet Union, there's technically a bunch of little republics. Now, Russia is the biggest one and exercises the most control, but there were all these other little ones that were also part of it as well. The other thing we need to get through is the ideal versus reality of communism. As Karl Marx saw it when we first read him back in January, communism meant that workers were going to have a say by voting. Workers were going to be in the government so that it was more fair and equitable and democratic. The workers would decide who needed resources under the principle of from each according to his ability to each according to his need. And that workers would decide on the future use of common resources, the means of production. Hold on, I gotta pause. All right. Now, that's the ideal. The reality of it was, though, when Russia went, quote-unquote, communist under Lenin, is that Lenin and the other members of the Communist Party thought that workers couldn't be trusted, they weren't intelligent enough, they didn't understand what was for their own good, so they had to be led by the Communist Party with what they called vanguard communism. Dividing up resources based on need is hard to do. Making it so it's the most fair is very hard, so they used rationing, which isn't fair. It's equal, but it's not fair, which isn't the goal of communism. And the last one is supposed to be democratic, but the Soviet Union will be a one-party state or dictatorship the whole time, where the only party that gets anything done is the Communist Party. They're the only people in government, and usually, actually, there's only one person who actually has a lot of control. Now, these are all kind of the things that were talked about in the early parts of the document you did yesterday, so I would just like you to, if you have any questions, ask questions about the homework you had yesterday that I can answer. And that's what this is here for. And there'll be a question here. Now, once Lenin is gone and he dies in 1924, these guys here, the Politburo, which is like the head of the party, are kind of the next in line. And Stalin, you can see, is right here. Now, Lenin didn't trust Stalin, didn't like him, told people to watch out for him. But he had an important job, which is he was the general secretary. At the time, it was assumed that Trotsky and the other people who were heads of far more important organizations or parts of the government and the party would be the people who would end up being in charge. But Stalin was pretty clever. So you can see that this whole thing is very confusing. As a one-party state, it's wild because the party is super important, but there is still technically like a legislature and a government and everything else. What made Stalin so great is that he was the general secretary, which gave him a lot of power over membership and connections to membership and support from membership, whereas the Politburo was not always very well supported. But the bigger thing about this is that this whole system, which there's another one, is so very confusing to figure out that there's a lot of places where he could gain power and authority by offering people support, offering people help, etc. throughout the entire thing. And it doesn't have a way in which there's any way to directly check his power as he slowly gets more power over the party. This means that the general secretary often ends up being the premier as well. The Politburo is still very important. That's kind of like the head of the Soviet, the Communist Party. But it's very interesting how he's able to kind of wheedle his way in by sort of playing people off each other and manipulating the terrible organization. He will then get involved in a lot of purges to get rid of rivals, the biggest one being Leon Trotsky, who he will exile and then he will kill or have killed in Mexico by being stabbed with an ice pick, always common in Mexico. And then he will also do things like, again, propagandistically to get rid of rivals so that he looks like he's the only person who actually has important or influential ways of solving problems. Like, that's the Commissar, who's gone. That's Trotsky right there next to Lenin, but we can't have that because Trotsky is a traitor, so he's gone. There's Trotsky again right there. Now Lenin has a bigger platform. Now, the thing you're looking at today is the 5-year plan. The 5-year plan was a massive industrial ramp-up where Stalin was going to use his central planning powers to increase the industrial production in factories, in mines, etc. in the Soviet Union. So he's going to order people, that's the idea of central planning, is that it's from the government, to take command of these things and increase by these massive quotas what they are producing. And he thought to rapidly industrialize or they would fall behind Western countries' abilities to produce stuff. Oftentimes, again, the government organized goals for certain factories as well as organized punishments. Your assignment will look at that and look at the 5-year plan. To end this, I just want to have you ask again, are there any questions about Stalin or his rise that you have right now, or about how Stalin is similar or different from Hitler?